Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your attendance at today's school forum meeting. We're going to get cracking and do apologies first. So, Jane, could you just run through the apologies that you've received, please?
Yes, Chair. We have received apologies from Alison Chambers, Stuart Williams, Catherine Pullen, Peter French, Steve Cox and Gary Morphus, though we have Joe Ward attending as the representative for Catherine.
Excellent, thank you. And then minutes and actions from the previous meeting. So if we can just look at the minutes from the previous meeting, these are pages 5 to 10 in the agenda packs. So technically page 5 in the pack, but page 1 of the minutes. Page 6 and page 2. Page 7 of the pack, page 3 of the minutes. Page 8 and 4. 9 and 5. And page 10 and 6. I didn't hear or see anything amongst the meeting there, so can I take that as an accurate record of the meeting that we held? Thank you. There are no actions from that meeting. So that means that we can move on to item 3 today, which is the finance update. And for this, we hand over to Andrew Merry.
Hi, everybody. So the finance update covers update on school funding for 22-23 and 23-24, as well as asking for a decision on the continuation of the 0.5% transfer from the schools block to the high needs block. I'll start with school funding in 22-23. There hasn't been any updates to the amount of funding we're receiving. That has stayed static, which it normally does, up until July, when we get updates around census numbers for the early years block. There's been no changes to our allocations in terms of funding. The main area of pressure continues to be the high needs block. As you can see from the report, we're currently forecasting an overspend of around 335,000 in year, which gives a total deficit of 1.5 million on the high needs block. So again, it's an area that we all know about is under significant demand. It continues to be that, and that isn't changing at the minute. I think what we are doing, the recovery plan we've put in place, is helping to contain the demand, but not recover the deficit position. So the other point is that although early years is largely on budget, the mix of children we are funding is different to the current funding level we've got. So the level of funding we're getting for 2-year-olds is less than our current expenditure for the 3- and 4-year-olds is kind of offsetting that. So although in total it's coming in pretty much on budget, the split between the two is a little bit different to what we're seeing in terms of what we're paying out. That will be addressed when we get to the July census. So when we do the census and the January census, and then that gets published by the DfE in July, we will see our funding change, and it will flip round to reflect that new position. So largely, I think we're losing one area but gaining another, so it shouldn't have too much of an impact overall on the figures we're seeing coming through. Is there any questions on the 22-23 position before I move on to the 23-24? Okay, I'll take that as a no and move on. So the amount of detail, what I would say is, due to this level of changes we've seen in government over recent months, the information I've published was published a while ago, and may be subject to change when we get the final allocation. But I'm trying to present a best position as I know now in terms of the latest position on government funding. So at a high level, the funding for the schools block will increase by £1 million or 3.6%, as per the indicative publications that have come out. And the high needs block, we're seeing an increase of around 6.2%, which equates to 330,000. And on our central schools block, we're seeing an increase of 11,000, which will relate to about 6%. The early years block has not been published in terms of what we think the allocation will be for those. The early years block is managed differently to the 3 different blocks that I've quoted before, and we generally don't know what our funding is going to be until it's published. There's a little information which I know isn't helpful for the sector in terms of planning. What I would say is the only thing that I can add around the early years block is the government have said in cash terms they will stick to the indicative allocations in 20 that was already published, which will mean a slight increase. I can't confirm what that increase would be, but it won't be anywhere near the level of inflation that we're currently seeing, is what I would say. Looking at similar to the other blocks, somewhere between 3 and 6%, I would expect to see an increase of, and how that flows through, I'm not sure. As soon as I know, I will communicate to the service area, who will pass that on to the early year settings through their normal communication channel. I won't run through the detailed report, but I would say based on the above data, if Schools Forum did approve the transfer of the 0.5% from the schools block to the high needs block, that would equate to 147,000 in 23-24. So I have put some information around the MSG minimum funding guarantee, so which is probably where the schools are. So each school will get an increase of between 0 and 0.5% per pupil, and how that will flow through. We will we can't set it outside of those parameters. If we on the new pro forma, when we get it, it will have to go. If we do want to outside of that, we've got to agree it with the Secretary of State. So all in all, it's a positive. It's positive we're getting an increase, but they're not going to reflect the total pressures that school are forthcoming under, based on what we know to date. Obviously, the final allocations will be published alongside the local government finance settlement. So early in the new year, I'm hoping to publish, give all schools an indicative allocation relatively early in the new year, so you can start planning for the next academic year. Happy to take any questions if there is any on 23-24.
Thank you for the report and the summary, Andrew. Can I just ask colleagues, has anybody got any questions that are pertinent to the report and the summary that Andrew's just provided for us? Okay, no one's put the hand up. So, Andrew, are you asking us as a forum to make a decision about the transferring of the 0.5%?
Yes, please, yeah.
Right, can I have a show of hands then amongst the group as to support for this proposal, please? I think that was unanimous, Jane.
It was, Chair, thank you.
Okay, so thank you to Andrew. And next then, item 4 is the SEND recovery plan. This was going to be a report from Louise Crookenden Johnson, but will somebody be reporting that in her absence? Is that going to be you, Bernadette?
Yes, thank you, Ben.
Fabulous, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. I apologies from Louise for today's meeting. I will assume that you've all read the report. So what I'll aim to do is just to share some highlights and then take any comments or questions. Firstly, as Andrew has stated, the demand within the SEND and inclusion services continues to grow. We currently have 309 education, health and care plans and another 30 cases in assessment. We're also seeing increasing pressure in our inclusion services, children with emotional and social needs and anxiety about attending school. So that's the backdrop, and we're not unusual in terms of how we compare with other local authorities. Having said that, the work of the recovery plan and the initiatives that are happening there, as Andrew has stated, are helping to contain some of that demand. But also, I think, seeing increased confidence, I would say carefully, having met with some parents earlier today, increased confidence in the school support partnership. It's great to hear parents talking about it and using that language and understanding what it means, and seeing benefits of it. And within that, I talk about all the projects we've described within the report. We've had some very positive feedback from parents around the provision at the new mainstream plus provision at UCC. That's obviously where children have transitioned into that for the first time. Really positive feedback on that. I know we're going to touch on it on the agenda, but also positive feedback from parents around the new banding matrix. And I think what parents have said, we don't really care what conversations the local authority have with schools around the funding. We just need to know that our children's needs are being met. So that was encouraging as well. And I'm sure we'll probably say more about that in the next agenda item. A couple of things to consider. We're sort of awaiting the impact of the National Green Paper. That's still being considered, and we understand there's nothing more to be said about that till possibly early year, spring, and Dawn's agreeing with me on that. We've also, but we have had published the SEND Ofsted framework, inspection framework, that was released last week, the latter end of last week. And just a couple of highlights on that in terms of how it differs from previous inspection frameworks: a much greater focus on individual children's experiences and on their outcomes, a greater focus on SEN support, and also on alternative provision. So there are areas we'll be doing our preparation and talking obviously with you as a collective around some of those areas for scrutiny. So we potentially are expecting, we haven't had a SEND inspection since July 2017, so it wouldn't be surprising were we to have a visit in the spring or summer term, just to highlight that to you. In terms of our, alongside that, we are doing a large exercise in terms of the Better Value Review with our colleagues in the DFE and our consultants Newton Europe. And we've just completed a major data exercise within the local authority, looking at individual children's plans, provision, going back to 2017. And I mean, that's a considerable data exercise, having to submit that. And we've had to submit that cohort information this week. The next steps will be for DFE colleagues to work with us between February and June to undertake quite a detailed diagnostic exercise to help us to understand how we're using our high needs funding, and look at the lessons learned from other local authorities and what expertise they would bring to us to be able to address that. They'll be testing how we're addressing it at the moment, value for money. So we're undertaking that exercise at the moment. We're not clear about the detail, how much conversations they'll want to have across the partnership, across the SEND system, but we're expecting that will be part of the next phase. In terms of our capital, we have remaining capital to consider, and the SEND Programme Board are giving that consideration. We will be taking a paper to Cabinet in March to agree delegated authority for the remaining capital, and at that point we'll be coming back to colleagues to discuss with you how we might utilise that remaining capital. The work on the early years pathway review continues. Again, we've had approval from Cabinet to engage our community in looking at what new arrangements might look like. That early conversations have started with our early years providers, our colleagues in early years, and in our with our school leadership at the Parks and the OCE. And we've got our next meeting to progress the action plan on the 12th of January. I'll stop there, if I may, and take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Bernadette. Can we have hands up for any comments or questions following that report?
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay, that's great. Bernadette, was there anything else within that agenda item?
No, thank you. No,
Looks like
thank
you said-
you. Sorry, I'm in the office. I need to move to get to keep the light on.
That's great. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on then. Everyone happy? I'm not seeing anybody looking remotely unhappy, so I'm going to move on with the agenda. Item 5 then, which is EHCP banding. And it's me for the first part, which is parental feedback. Since we last met, I've received 2 pieces of parental feedback, one of which School Forum are aware of because you've seen a draft response and approved the draft response, and another was an inquiry that came directly to me. And I felt that it was important to share both of those with the group, just so that everyone's aware of the queries that have been raised. So the first one was via a letter, the concern centred around the banding model. And my response, which, as I alluded to, you have seen, you should have seen, did address those concerns and confirmed that the banding model will not replace the provision within an EHCP, nor will it result in less funding. It reinforced the key change that the funding is not written into the EHCP, and is provision and not a funding arrangement. And Bernadette, it was really refreshing to hear you say that the communication of that has been greeted with some warmth and positivity. Is that from the Parent Carer Voice group?
Ben, it's from the Parent Carer Voice and our wider collaborative group as well, that we meet with regularly. And having had a discussion with them today, they'd be really interested, this is a suggestion from them, that if you as Chair of Schools Forum would like at some point to meet with them as a collaborative, they'd be really interested to talk about, particularly about the graduated response, helping parents. What does that look like? We talk about it in the banding. They were quite happy about the arrangements, the group I spoke to, but they'd like to know a little bit more. What does it look like in a school? And so they would extend an invitation to you or a member of Schools Forum who might come and talk to the collaborative about that at one of their meetings.
How frequently, Bernadette, does this group get together?
Every couple of months. Their next meeting is on the 17th of January in the morning. They have an independent facilitator, usually meet in Oakham, and it's a small group. It's never more than 6 to 10 parents who come and represent other parents. And they felt it would be a useful conversation.
Well, I'd be more than happy to do that on behalf of Schools Forum. I think it would also be useful to have a representative from the working party that created that banding model to accompany me, because they will have a little bit more detail than myself, having gone through the process of creating that. So is that something, Jane, that we could possibly put out to the Schools Forum members and particularly that working group to see if we can get a volunteer? Sharon, you putting your hand up? Are you volunteering, Sharon? You're muted, by the way.
But best thing to be. Yes, I was part of that group, so I'm very happy to accompany you, Ben, if it would be helpful.
Well, it looks like we don't need to do that, Jane, because we've already sorted it.
That's great. Thank you.
Just to note the date, Jane, it's the 17th of January, and they meet between 10 and 2, and they usually meet at the Wisteria Hotel. So you can let me know what time would be convenient for you, and I'll pass it on to colleagues.
Okay, Sharon, if you and I just coordinate outside of this meeting, we can arrange that.
Thank you very much.
Right, so the second piece of feedback that I received was an email. It came directly to me. So I met with the parents in person, And the parent raised a couple of concerns really. Having watched the online meetings that we've conducted, she felt that some members referred to the parents of children with special educational needs and disabilities rather generically and not always positively, was her impression. Her perception of some of these meetings was that sometimes members of the forum didn't always display an empathy for the challenges, various challenges that families faced. And she describes to me this notion of othering that she felt was apparent in some of the meetings. Now, I had to go back and watch the meetings that she was referring to because I couldn't recall anything untoward occurring. But it was useful to talk to her face to face about these elements of feedback that she provided. So the outcomes of the meeting were, we had a discussion about it. I said that I would feed that back to the group because, you know, if we treat feedback as a gift, whether you agree with it or not, actually one of the key reflections is that we've got to remember that these meetings are in a public domain. They will be scrutinised. And I would just recommend that we all reflect on the perceptions that have been articulated to us, take these views on board and realise that when we're referring to parents, then they're not a homogenous group. There will always be really specific circumstances with each case, and that's it basically. So that's the feedback that I've received. That's the process that I went through to listen to it. Is there any comments or questions on the group about that? Okay, thank you. So, and with the first instance, with the letter, I didn't receive a further inquiry about that, so I have assumed that the concerns were addressed through the letter that we sent. Right, so item 5B is an update regarding the working group and communication. So I think this was going to be from Helen Chester, but she's not in the meeting, so is somebody going to present that on her behalf?
Ben, I think it's probably already been covered in terms of the communication. Our understanding is the same agenda item.
Okay, and has that communication gone through the parent group that you talked about earlier?
Yes.
Okay, fabulous. Right then, if everyone's happy to move on, just looking at the screen, we'll move to item 6 then, which is the early years working group. So Joe, have you got a verbal update for us on any meetings that you've had since we last met as a schools forum group?
Yes, absolutely. So we held our early years working party meeting on Monday, the 5th of December. It was quite a passionate meeting from quite a lot of the managers, talking about the autumn statement, talking about the 9.7 increase in minimum wage and how, as businesses, as an early years business, how we're going to stay afloat, basically. One manager was in particular quite expressive about her situation and how she worked very long hours and didn't get paid anymore. And actually it was really sad to hear how actually she has no drive to work in the sector anymore. And I know that is happening a lot. So it's just from an early years perspective quite difficult to hear, and we were all kind of behind her. There's a few managers from Rutland that have written to our local MP about what's going on, and the situation kind of isn't getting any better. But what was quite sad, again, we had a generic letter from the government explaining all of the monies that they have put into the sector, but again, not really addressing the issues that we on the ground are seeing right now. We seem to be banging the same drum and going over and over, and I think in the last meeting that I had here too, we're talking about the same kind of things, and it just doesn't seem to kind of be improving. The majority of the nurseries within the county are saying that we are not full to capacity in relation to how many places we can have, but we're full to the staff from a ratio point of view. Now, that hasn't changed for a long time, and that is only going to get worse. I know 3 settings, myself included, who we've got more children coming into the setting, but I've got no staff, so I'm having to say no. Now, that's going to have a huge effect on sufficiency for Rutland moving forward. We are working still on organising an early years career presentation for the senior schools within the county. So we're really hopeful that what we can do as educators is spark, even if it's just one student's interest in working in the sector. So we're working on that. So hopefully we might get a few people wanting to be part of this really rewarding job. So that's kind of it, Ben. I'm sorry, it's the same kind of thing as before.
Thank you, Jo. I'm assuming this isn't a Rutland problem, this is a national problem. And are you finding that colleagues in other authorities are experiencing the same challenges?
Absolutely. There have been recently, with Casterton, with my setting being on the border, I have quite a bit of communication with Lincolnshire settings around Stamford, and they're seeing the same thing. Recently, there was a national, well, there was three owners of nurseries have set up early years equality. So basically a kind of party to kind of move forward to celebrate us, but also to get us heard, really. So yes, it's definitely a national thing. It's not just here in Rutland.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for Jo from the group?
But,
Sharon?
sorry, it's just a comment really, Jo. So yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And I think the worry for us needs to be actually it's going to have a knock-on effect for children as they come into school as well. Because if we're not able to provide this high quality early years provision, then it will affect us all going forward. So absolutely, we need to keep working away and finding ways to, as you say, trying to attract staff in. We're finding the same in school. We're really struggling. Support staff across the board, actually, but EYFS, but if I'm really honest, we're kind of offering interviews and people are just not turning up, or I think we have a constant advert out and we're just really struggling. And I think it is pay that is the biggest barrier. There's just a comment, Chair.
Sorry, Sharon, are you getting people apply? Because that's what we're struggling with. People are struggling with the fact that you have adverts out there. We are trying to think outside the box in relation to that. But are you getting people applying for early years?
We are, but then they're not actually coming for the interviews. So we're not, so the same as you really, because we get quite hopeful. And just last week we had it 2 planned and they just didn't turn up. We haven't been able to contact them again. So no, we, like you, we're really struggling.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, Jo, for that update.
Sorry, Ben,
sorry.
Jill has got a hand raised.
Jill, I didn't see that, I do apologise.
It's all right, I'm lurking in the corner probably. Just to say that Karen Bland and I met with the early years DFE representative this week. And we were Karen fed very strongly back about the meeting and the concerns that are raised. And what we have asked is that whether we could get him to attend one of the working party meetings so they can actually hear it from the voice of and he's very receptive to that. It's just a matter of making sure we can get dates that match. But it is, we are making sure that these things are shared with the DFE very much. And as you said, this is not a Rutland specific issue. It is a national concern. And, things, I think writing to MP is great. And I think that's one of the things that we were suggested by the DFE to make sure that was happening and making sure that there's that lobbying as much as we can do. So I just wanted to sort of say that is, the local authority is listening and doing what we can from a lobbying. And I know, as I said to Andrew about money, there isn't, we know that the money is tight that's coming in, and you have to do a fantastic job with it. But it's, we are there on your behalf.
Thank you, Jill. No, that means a lot. I know Karen mentioned at the working party about having a representative, and we all felt very positively about that. So that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Wilby, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just a touchline comment, Jill. In extremis, as we're in this sort of situation, is there any scope for the Grey Brigade, coming in on a sort of voluntary basis to help out, just lend more hands to help?
I will probably leave that to my early years professional colleagues on that one, but I think there are a lot of risks that come with that. It's not just necessarily about having bodies in buildings, it's actually about having that quality of skill and everything else that goes with it. But I'm sure Joe or Sharon, Fiona may have something they wish to add to that.
We have a little bit of a campaign at the moment with kind of grandparents coming into school to hear the children read, and we're doing as many different events. So actually it is a community, you know, we're trying to kind of expand a little bit and do. So yes, I don't know about Fiona and Joe, slightly different with early years, but certainly in school, you know, we're grateful for any help that can come in our direction, and we do provide training, just to put that out, and a nice badge. So
I would agree, Sharon, certainly within school, but not necessarily in a preschool setting.
No, I would echo that. I think Jill said about the quality, and I think any help and hands on deck is great. But I think within a preschool setting or nursery setting, we need that quality really.
Right, we're all done on that item. Just looking around the screen. Let's move on. Item 7 is pupil planning, place planning, and that's Jill, I believe.
Yes, very brief one today. The SCAP is going through its final validation processes. So Jonathan Weller, I believe Jane is on to do it, to bring the actual formal SCAP to the next schools forum. So that's where we are with that. The 2023 admissions round has already started. So, and I think secondary schools will be aware that the ranking, we've had a slight delay in process because of another local authority's admissions processes, but we are getting on with that. But the process is underway, and we've got a meeting with the DFE in January, a couple of DFE departments, admissions and pupil place planning, to look at Rutland's in-year admissions pressures, and just see what else we can possibly be doing. We're also meeting with Lincolnshire on that as well, just to try and see what alternatives there can be when we have the, you know, particularly the secondary in-year admissions. But that's it really from a pupil place planning at this point in time.
Any questions or comments for Jill? David?
Yeah, just to chip in from the sidelines again, Jill. Tick BG for Julie for, as well as doing all her pupil place planning bits, has been monitoring the Ukraine children, and the stats coming out from that have been extremely good. Thank you.
Thank you.
When you say the statistics, David, what are those statistics about?
Sorry, Ben.
You mentioned the statistics on the Ukrainian children. I was just asking what statistics you're referring to.
Oh, it's just that we get a regular update now of where all the Ukrainian students are, where they're based, and how many we've got, etc. It's just a tally, really, to be able to keep an eye on the board, and they are spread right throughout the county, and it just requires a little bit of data processing, and she's been doing a cracking job on it.
Oh, that's great to know, thank you. Right then, is everyone happy for me to move on to item 8, which is the forward plan for 22-23? I could ask people to just cast their eyes onto page 22 of the pack, which shows the agenda essentially for our next meeting on the 16th of March. Is there anything additional to those items that anyone on the group would like to suggest? Sharon, possibly once you and I have met with the parent carer group, maybe there's an opportunity to just verbally feedback
yes,
how that meeting went. There might be something that comes out of that meeting that we want to report. So Jane, if you could just note that. Okay. Looks like everyone's happy with that. And then any urgent business? I've not received any. Jane, have you?
I have not been notified of any urgent business, Chair.
David?
If I can just add, the education bulletin is just coming out today, and I know that Miranda has popped in there all sorts of helpful notes about the various medical ailments that are running rife in schools and things like that. So I hope you'll find it helpful to you. And just a word to all of you, thank you so much for everything that you've done this year, and have a very good, safe and happy run to Christmas.
Thank you, David. Your ongoing support is always really highly valued by everybody in Rutland, so we appreciate that. Okay, so the meeting dates, Thursday the 16th of March and Thursday the 22nd of June will be the last two meetings of this academic year, both to be held on Zoom. With that, I'm going to draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all for your attendance and your input. Have a great evening, and if I don't see you before then, have a great Christmas, everyone.
And you.
And
Thanks.
you. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, Chair. Meeting officially closed at 4:40 p.m.